ある組織の幹部だ。250万。あとは契約を履行した時その男が渡す。殺し屋ナンバー3にランクされている君の腕次第だ。
Ladies, gentlemen, and those who do not believe in a gender binary, do not adjust your set. This is, in fact, Patrick Ripoll, the former host of Directors Club, back to fulfill an old debt. Now, I'm going to have to give you a little bit of history here, so stay with me. And if you're worried that the asshole with the loud mouth who mutters a lot is back, this is a limited time, one-time special sort of episode that I've returned for. Let me set this up. Way back in, it was either 2013 or 2014. I think probably 2013. I had a friend who was going to be the lead actor in a film that was an independent film that was trying to get funding on Kickstarter, and I was trying to help them out get the movie kickstarted. And I put out a challenge to all the listeners of Directors Club, which is if you donate $50 or more to this Kickstarter, you can give me the topic of a bonus episode, and I will do any bonus episode on any topic you choose. So if you go back on the Directors Club feed, you're going to find some of those bonus episodes. I don't think they're necessarily designated as being part of this Kickstarter thing, but they're in there. Like I reviewed the 2 Cape Fear movies. I went back and rewatched a bunch of movies that I didn't like with Bill Ackerman. I sat down with Jim and we did some stuff. So I want to say like 4 or 5 people donated $50. And one of those people was Tyler Foster, who you might remember from the Quentin Tarantino episode way back when. And Tyler Foster wanted me to do a Directors Club episode on Seijun Suzuki. And I said yes. And then I quit the podcast and never talked to him again. I sort of made a promise and then ghosted. And I want to say in the past 5 to 4 years, we've talked on and off about like, oh, that's right, I still owe you that bonus episode. By the way, the film in question is called Most Likely. It did end up getting funded and it got made. It's on Amazon Prime. My music is in it. Jim did a bunch of music for the movie. So if you are curious about them, and it only. So I had like 5 people donate $50 and it made its goal by like $40. So like it definitely exists because of Directors Club, and I'm very proud of that. So if you're curious about the movie that this whole sequence of events wrought, look up Most Likely on Amazon Prime. At any rate, this year, in my own personal life, I've just sort of been watching a bunch of Asian films, and I realized, oh, that's right, I had that bonus episode, that Seijun Suzuki bonus episode, I still owed Tyler Foster. So I contacted him, and over the past like 9 months, we've slowly tried to get together to record this, and we've delayed it and delayed it and delayed it and moved times and troubleshot, and we're finally here. Tyler, how are you doing?
I'm great. Even this last like hour has been a struggle, but
the world doesn't want us to talk about Seijun Suzuki, but you know what I say? Fuck the world. What has the world done for us lately?
Right. That's something I was thinking about earlier. Is like I was thinking about listening to your other podcast, the Popcorn Dinner, and I was like, it's every month that goes by in the world that we're currently living in just feels like a million years. So in my head, I have no distinction of how long ago I was listening to your episodes of Directors Club and listening to that podcast. That could have been sometime this year, and I it's just like it feels like a million years ago.
It really the time expansion, the dilation, would it be dilation? Yeah, the time dilation of the current American sort of political climate is a real fucking thing. And it really sucks. Absolutely. I don't even remember when we were doing Popcorn Supper. I don't think those episodes exist on the internet anywhere either. So like, I can't even go online and check. But I do know that I went online, like I committed wholesale. I happened to have a job where I was making more money than I previously did. And I had $400 in my bank account, which was unheard of. And I said, you know what, I saw the money, and I had my instinct whenever I see money, which is, I'll fix you. I'll get rid of you real quick. And I bought the 2 Arrow box sets of early Seijun Suzuki, and I bought some other Seijun Suzuki movies. And once I spent $120 on Seijun Suzuki Blu-rays, I was like, okay, now I can't fuck around. I have to record this episode. So we're going to go over the work of Seijun Suzuki. Very interesting director from the Japanese New Wave, sort of unknown in America during his time. His films weren't really released over here, I don't believe. While he worked primarily in the 50s and 60s. I think it wasn't until like the mid 80s that America started getting retrospectives and stuff, and people started rediscovering what an interesting director he was. Mostly known for crime films, very surreal, violent, very sexual, just bizarre Yakuza movies like Tokyo Drifter, Branded to Kill. But his career went all over the place, so we're going to be talking about that. I am curious, Tyler, first of all, what was it about Seijun Suzuki that made you want to spend $50 to make me talk about him?
That's the thing that I was thinking about that too, because it's like back when I wanted Directors Club to do Seijun Suzuki, I hadn't really seen that many of his movies. I'd probably seen like 5 or 6 of his movies maybe, and so I guess I just thought this is a director that has something that's interesting in some way, and then I just wanted you guys to talk about it. I didn't really have a particular hook as to what I found most interesting about Suzuki. When I was thinking about, recording this and I was watching the stuff, I do feel like his career can be broken up into 3 pretty distinct periods, because there's the first part, like he was a director for hire, and so there's this period in the like late 50s, early 60s where he's mostly just doing the kind of things that they assigned to him at this major Japanese film company, Nikkatsu. And so he's doing, work for hire. He's being assigned these youth pictures that are about like teen drama, teen melodrama and stuff like that. And then later they assign him, Yakuza pictures and samurai movies and stuff that will go on. They're the B movie half of Double Bills. So they have the company has like prestige directors, and they have an A picture, and then Suzuki makes this job for hire B picture that will go on the second half of the Double Bill. And at a certain point during the mid 60s, early 60s, like he starts to get antsy and make more artistic movies, or he starts to sneak in his own proclivities into the movies that he's making. And then in the late 60s, he makes Branded to Kill. The legend is that they fired him immediately, but I guess they fired him like several months later. So it wasn't quite like that he pissed them off so much that they had to get rid of him. But he did get fired, and then he stopped working for a little while, and then he made a few more pictures all the way up until like 2003 or 2006 or something. And I think those are generally a little bit more pure sensibility. Whatever his sensibility is, he gets really into it. There's this trilogy of movies that I haven't seen in the later period called the Taisho trilogy. And those, I went to a retrospective when they were touring his films on 35mm, and I was just too exhausted to stay awake. But it had I saw part of the first one, and it was very poetic and not like the movies that he made that we're going to talk about are very they have a pop sensibility. They really crackle.
Absolutely.
And so eventually he got to really spread his wings. But I think the most interesting period is this period in the middle that we're talking about, where it's like he's getting these jobs that the studio doesn't really care about, and he's starting to push back on the things that he is asked to do or try to expand the horizons a little bit. And I just find, to me, we're going to talk about him, that's the thing that I find most interesting, because I don't really think of a lot of American directors that get jobs that they're not invested in, but they have their own passion and they sort of imprint it onto the work. I feel like when you have job for hire directors in America, they just kind of do what is asked of them.
I think there's a certain strain of B-movie director. I don't have all the biographical information about directors like Anthony Mann or Samuel Fuller or stuff like that. But I think in the 50s there was a kind of director who did sort of operate in a similar sense as Seijun Suzuki, not making films as wild as Seijun Suzuki made. I don't think there really is an American equivalent to Branded to Kill, or at least not one that jumps to mind. But
I do think that Samuel Fuller is probably a pretty good comparison, though.
But I think if I remember the Samuel Fuller episode of Directors Club that I did correctly, I believe a lot of Samuel Fuller's work was independently produced, which puts it in a sort of a different world. Nikkatsu, the studio in which he spent most of his career with and will forever be associated with, I don't have I should say this right up front, which is that I'm not an expert on Japanese cinema. I'm not an expert on Japanese history. I'm not an expert on the Japanese New Wave in particular. And I'm not, I wouldn't call myself particularly knowledgeable even of Japanese culture. I've seen several films, television shows, video games. I've consumed media from Japan my whole life, but I'm not going to be the guy, unfortunately, who can really put all this into a proper context. So if you're coming to this episode hoping to get this lesson about Nikkatsu and the Japanese film industry and Seijun Suzuki and all that, maybe Tyler can provide that, but I absolutely can't.
No, this is going to be a great podcast because neither of us know what we're talking about.
All right. Well, then this is, again, a little bit more classic Directors Club, because I think when Directors Club started, me and Jim, the whole thing was we were very enthusiastic about film, but we didn't really know shit about it. So it was a lot of us discovering directors and stuff like that. So that's what's going to be like this. So when I talk about Nikkatsu, they're a B-movie studio. They cranked out movies. They had a set schedule, which was two weeks of pre-production, 3 weeks of shooting, 2 weeks of post-production. They released, I think, 2 movies a week. So they released about 100 movies a year or something along those lines. This is the kind of studio that they were. So I think of them, and again, this may be completely off base, but I kind of think of them somewhere along the lines of an AIP or something like that, American International Pictures.
I can. That seems like I would agree with that. Based on what I know, I would agree with that.
Yeah, I mean the big difference is Nikkatsu was a star-based studio in a way that American International Pictures never maintained. American International made their name off sensational marketing and posters and titles and Roger Corman cranking out super cheap movies in really inventive ways. American International, a lot of future movie stars passed through their gates, but they never marketed a movie as this is a Jack Nicholson movie, because no one knew who the hell Jack Nicholson was when he was in AIP movies. And that way Nikkatsu was different, because Nikkatsu was very much very classic Hollywood. Here are like you would, I don't know, more like 30s Hollywood, where it's like, here's the Betty Davis picture that's coming out this week. Here's the Betty Davis picture that's coming out next month. Here's the one that's coming out after that. And they assign a director a script, and they assign the script an actor. And the whole idea is like, well, this is, like Tokyo Drifter is a movie that was used to sell a pop song. And like, they're very old fashioned in a way that AIP isn't. But like, in terms of budgets, in terms of sort of the speed of production and everything, I think sort of like independent films in the 50s is a good independent American films are sort of a good counterpoint. I do want to talk.
One of the Suzuki's that I watched, Arrow also put out these sets that are called Nikkatsu Diamond Guys. That was the nickname for their stars. So, like, this guy that's in a lot of Suzuki's movies, Joe Shishido, who I really enjoy, he's one of their diamond guys.
Man, okay, we're going to talk about Joe Shishido in a second, because Joe Shishido is he's a great match for Suzuki, but that comes a little later in the career. I think the only way we're going to be able to get through all of this is if we sort of go chronologically. Mm-hmm. So for a long time, a lot of Suzuki's work, the only work that was really available in America was the cherry-picked sort of quote-unquote interesting years where he started to be more subversive and sneak weird stuff into it. Criterion released Tokyo Drifter. They released Branded to Kill, Youth of the Beast, Gates of Flesh, Fighting Elegy. These are the films that sort of art house audiences began to know and revere Seijun Suzuki for, and that they are the films that sort of came after a long period of him cranking out B movies. And I think these Arrow box sets, they might not be full of great films, but the thing that makes them valuable is that they do provide context for those films, like where Suzuki ended up, because he is not the Seijun Suzuki of the like mid 60s in these late 50s sort of B movies. So 8 Hours of Terror is, I think, the earliest released Seijun Suzuki film that's commercially available in America. That could be completely wrong, but that is, I believe, the case. And it is basically it's from 1957. It's basically Stagecoach. So it's about this bus that is traveling like through this mountainous, dangerous Japanese countryside. It's a place with a lot of bandits. It's a place with, the way that the stagecoach has to go through the American West, and that's dangerous because of Native Americans, because Stagecoach was a movie from the 30s. So, it was colonialist as all fuck. So 8 Hours of Terror is a contemporary film. It takes place in the 50s, obviously being on a bus instead of a horse-drawn carriage. So that is more actual bandits. I think there's like a bank robber on the run. There is a mysterious figure on the bus who ends up sort of saving everybody, and he's sort of the Ringo Kid. And there's this sort of prostitute, I want to say. The other thing about setting up this episode is that because for months and months we've been trying to figure out when we're going to record it, the preparation for this episode has been spread across like 5 months. So like my memory of a lot of these these early films is not great, but
there's also like a corporate executive who doesn't want to get himself, he looks down on everybody else on the bus. One of the other Nikkatsu guys, Diamond Guys, which unfortunately I don't remember his name, but he's on the bus, and he's just sort of a straight shooter. Like at some point he tries to lead everybody in a Russian folk song to like calm everybody's nerves. And there's a shifty businessman who's trying to sell his lingerie. If there's anything that is like, I think that Suzuki is very good at setting up distinct characters. So I think that 8 Hours of Terror is a good example of that.
Yeah, it has that feeling of Stagecoach or like Speed or Taking of the Pelham 1, 2, 3. that sort of film where you get sort of this cross section of Japanese society represented through all the people who are on this bus in this situation. At one point, it becomes a hostage situation with these bank robbers who are on the run. And the things I find interesting about it is that it is comical in a way that I associate with later Suzuki movies. It has a weird sense of humor where the danger is very real and the violence is really real, and it's not a silly, goofy movie, but there are moments that are very silly and goofy. It has sort of the tonal whiplash that you would associate with later Suzuki movies.
At one point, there's this woman on the bus who she has a baby, and she decides to she's depressed because her husband has left or is dead or something, and so she jumps off a bridge with the baby, and then running in the background of this movie is this guy who came back from the war. And then he freaked out when he found out that his wife that he had left had gotten a new husband, and he murdered them in a fit of rage. So he's under arrest on the bus, but because he was a wartime doctor, they uncuff him so that he can help save the baby. And that's this thing that's going on in the background of this movie that also has this wacky lingerie salesman who's like bumbling around and doing goofy comedy stuff.
And there's like an early scene where there's like crazy musical saws and just like music as they're like, is this haunted? Is there a ghost? Like it's kind of all over the place, and it's very cheap. It's very cheap looking. I mean, all of Seijun Suzuki's core films, probably every film he ever made, was very cheap, but he found ways to make them look spectacular later, whereas this does not. It's kind of effective in its overcrowded frames and just like really packed sort of compositions, but it doesn't have the sort of style that you would associate with Seijun Suzuki. But I do think it is interesting in that it's sort of, it has that thing that I come back to with Seijun Suzuki, which is, and ultimately I'm going to come to the conclusion that like I'm not a big fan of Seijun Suzuki, and a lot of times it's just I don't know how to take his movies. I sit and I watch them, and I just don't. It's like I'll often be sitting and watching them and not like it's just they don't register because they're so there's something aloof about him as a filmmaker, and it kind of has a little bit of that, even though it's a very early film of his.
Things that I think that 8 Hours of Terror, that you would look at 8 Hours of Terror and see things from other Seijun Suzuki movies or roots of his style. I mean, I do think that he was politically progressive. I think you see a lot of that in his other movies, and there's a little of that here where there's you mentioned the prostitute, like and they have these bank robbers that siege the bus at some point, and she finds this crafty way to get rid of one of them, and then after that they find out that she was a prostitute, and all the people on the bus like sort of ashamed that she's this she works on the American base, like that's a political, the Japanese were not happy with the Americans, obviously, so but like I think the Suzuki's loyalty sides with her, that she did something good for the people on the bus, and that they should respect her more than they're respecting her. Or what was the other thing? And I can't remember. But there's little hints of that in there, and then
that also is just straight out of Stagecoach. Like that is. Ringo and Dallas is the name of the prostitute, and that is I think the other thing about Suzuki we should mention is that he didn't write any of his scripts. He shaped them in some way or another. He would change things as he needed to in making the film, but he did not really originate. I don't know if he originated any of his work. So, I think whoever wrote this movie was definitely just looking at John Ford's Stagecoach and being like, all right, we can repurpose this for bad Japanese country roads.
Mm. Another thing that I mentioned before, the distinct characters. I think you can pretty easily, tell these people apart in terms of their attitude and their behavior and things like that. And one of the most striking things that I like about Seijun Suzuki is the way that he moves his camera. I mean, you mentioned how his movies are generally very cheap, but he has this way of bringing like three dimensions to the things that he has. Like there's a shot in this movie a little later called "A Voice Without a Shadow," where it's an apartment set. It's probably on a studio lot. He's only got 3 apartments, but because he, just by panning from one end of this set to the other, fluidly and putting business going on in each apartment, it feels more real than it might have looked if he had shot it differently. And he does a little bit of that with the bus, where there's enough room where you can see where people are sitting in each seat and the little dramas that they're having going on in between them. And so that's another thing that I think you can see a little bit of going on in this movie.
For sure. I think any filmmaker making a movie set in a really claustrophobic location like a bus is going to be looking for ways to keep things interesting, and that's definitely one of the things going on in this. So me and you saw some different movies, so I'm just going to go through his filmography. I'm going to ask did you see Underworld Beauty?
I did see Underworld Beauty, and that's another thing that I think is really interesting about Seijun Suzuki is that, he has really striking female characters that I think are very memorable and wide-ranging. Some of them are horrible villains, and some of them are sort of innocent heroes. And I think that he's got a really good, if you're looking at these movies in 2018 and wondering if they're the portrayal of women or some of their politics have aged poorly, I think they've actually aged really well. Underworld Beauty has a really great performance by its lead actress. She's very, she has a great mix of vulnerability and hard edge. There's a great scene that I remember, even though I haven't seen it, I saw it years and years ago, and I still remember how good she was at playing drunk at one point. There's a funeral scene, and she's mad at the person who's dead, I think. And she's drunk and she's ranting, and it's really funny. And so that's mostly what I remember about Underworld Beauty.
And it's more in the crime.
More in the crime. I watched it for Noirvember, so.
Okay, yeah. I've read it as more like a noir film.
Mm-hmm.
So that's night. That's also that. So 8 Hours of Terror is 1957. Underworld Beauty is 1958. Another 1958 film he made was The Boy Who Came Back, which is one of his youth pictures.
I did not see that one.
So Arrow, when they released the box sets of his early films, they sort of divided the early films up into crime movies and youth films, and there is some overlap in both, but generally, this is it's about a social worker and a kid who's coming back from whatever the Japanese version of juvie is, and it's very generic. It's very much just like delinquent kid doesn't think the world will understand him, and this one woman thinks that, she's new to being a social worker, so she doesn't have proper boundaries. My partner is a social worker, and I was watching this and I was explaining the story to them, and they were like, this is you are bad at your job. This is really not what you should be doing. So it's all about this social worker getting all invested in his life and everything. It's the thing I would say that makes it notable in Suzuki's filmography, at least in the films that I've seen, is that it's extremely earnest. There's basically nothing subversive about this film. There's nothing really strange about it. Honestly, that earnestness is the thing that is lacking in a lot of his stuff, and a lot of what makes me sort of bounce off some of his films is a lack of earnestness. So I did enjoy The Boy Who Came Back as just a very generic sort of dramatic film. That the other thing that is, and this is true of a lot of foreign cinema compared to American cinema, is that American cinema of the 50s was very much, they only shot on studios. There was very little location photography unless it was a Western or something like that. And there's very little urban location photography in American film until you get into like the mid to late 60s and New Hollywood and stuff like that. And I think part of that is technology of cameras and film stocks being faster, and they're allowed to shoot under, you know, more realistic lighting conditions. And then part of that is also just the like permits and getting a whole, you know, huge crews and actors and everyone out somewhere on location could be difficult because America is just a really big, huge place. And if it is in LA, then it's probably not worth them going out to do it, at least in that period of time. That's not true of a lot of foreign cinema, and that's certainly not true of Japanese cinema. A lot of Seijun Suzuki's films were shot on sound stages, but The Boy Who Came Back is an example of like the kind of stunning production value you can get when you're just able to shoot around an actual city. And it looked great. Like, it's really, I mean, part of it's just Arrow in these box sets did really good restoration work and everything, but like, it's a really good looking movie, and it's and being this social drama, you know, it being grounded in real environments helps lift it up a lot. I wouldn't recommend it. You don't need to run out and go see The Boy Who Came Back. Though there is like one fight scene in it that's kind of brutal in a way that's like, okay, this reminds me of something that might have taken place in like Fighting Elegy or something like that. But as far as just like, it can be easy to forget, especially if you're someone who's only seen like the Criterion Suzuki that are mostly from his later period, and it can be easy to forget to like, actually, he was a guy with a job, and his job was to make movies, and a lot of the time he just did his job and shut up. And like, The Boy Who Came Back is one of those things. And I think when we talk about in cinema, when we talk about the sort of maverick filmmakers who, you know, broke all the rules and stuff like that, it's important to have like context for the stakes of doing so. And obviously Seijun Suzuki, like I think part of why he's so beloved is because of what he represents as far as taking on studio systems, taking on, you know, generic, dull, mainstream filmmaking. You know, he not only got fired for making Branded to Kill, but he sued the studio for wrongful termination, and then he got blacklisted, and he basically never made another feature film for another like 10 years. He sort of just moved to commercials after that. And I think that story is very attractive to people, the people who fight the system, the artists who have a vision and they follow that vision at all costs. And it's, I think an important part of Seijun Suzuki's story is that part came because he spent 10 years making these kinds of movies, like making 4 or 5 of these movies a year. So more so than the actual film itself, that's why I sort of appreciated going back and watching some of these old movies.
Right.
Now there was an Eclipse box. Oh, wait, hold on. Let me double check, make sure I'm not skipping anything. There is Voice Without a Shadow, which is also 1958, which you mentioned. Well, so I know you've seen that.
Voice Without a Shadow, I thought that was pretty good. I mean, it's one of those. He made a couple of movies. You're going to talk about. You'll come to the other one, but Voice Without a Shadow is one of those ones that just has a really great hook. And then the funny thing is that the movie's about something entirely different. But the hook is that there's this telephone operator. She runs the switchboard, and she calls the wrong number, and the wrong number happens to go to this this store that is being robbed, and someone is being murdered in it. And the murderer picks up the phone and like laughs at her, and then and she remembers this when she reads the paper that there was a murder, because she did this. She knows what wrong number she called, and 3 years later she's at home and she hears the same laugh, and so she knows that the the person who committed that murder is in her house. And then the movie actually turns out to be an entirely different mystery, but it's one of his better, pulpy sort of like, it's generally straightforward. There's some cool stuff in a fight scene at the end involving a cracked mirror, and it's one of those ones with Joe Shishido, which is really great, although he doesn't have a very big part in it. And I thought that one was pretty good. I find it very funny though that he cast, like, the main character is a news reporter, but he acts like a detective. I don't know. I watched it with a friend, and we were laughing about that the whole time. But I did think that one was one of the good ones.
Is that Joe Shishido? Is that pre or post plastic surgery?
Oh, he's still. I mean, I feel like when I was going through these, I feel like I watched his cheeks get bigger.
Yeah,
I could still. He still had the distinct cheeks in that one. So
okay, because we'll talk more about Joe Shishido when we're talking about Suzuki's later films, but I think those two are a very good actor-director pair, right. And his famous cheekbones are part of that. I think, did you see, let's see, I'm going through this filmography right here. I think the next one you would have seen is Take Aim at the Police Van.
Take Aim at the Police Van is the opposite. Take Aim at the Police Van is one of those ones where he was following the rules, and it's just kind of not very interesting. I mean, I think Take Aim at the Police Van is also hobbled by a particularly convoluted script. Yeah. I remember really having trouble following the movie, and I did not like that one very much. That's not high on my list.
It has a great opening.
Yeah. The writing on the window, like somebody writes a message on a window with chalk, and there's a sniper like hiding in the hills, and he reads the message written on the window through the sniper scope, and I saw that and I thought, oh, this is going to be pretty good, but then the movie just gets completely muddled after that.
Yeah, there's a the thing about Take Aim at the Police Van, and then this also applies to a lot of these early Suzuki movies, is that it has a great opening. Like, it's very promising at the start. And I want to say, I didn't watch all of Voice Without a Shadow. That's the name of the movie, right?
No, Take Aim at the Police Van.
Voice. Okay, yeah, okay. I watched the first 10 minutes of Voice Without a Shadow at the beginning of this year, and I just wasn't into it, so I turned it off. And this is before I knew I was going to be doing this episode. And I felt the same way about Voice Without a Shadow that I did about Take Aim at the Police Van, which is it had a really strong opening that is very intriguing, and then there is just something about Suzuki where, and again, this could be just the narrative I'm constructing in my head because of the arc of his career, but he just feels so disengaged from the material. It just, especially Take Aim at the Police Van, he just really doesn't care about these characters. He doesn't care about this story. He doesn't draw out any interesting themes. Even the most generic themes that you get in noir, like hopelessness or, paranoia or whatever. He really is at a distance from it. And there's a line in Take Aim at the Police Van where the reporter is trying to figure out what's happening. Is it a reporter in Take Aim, or is it a cop?
I don't remember Take Aim at the Police Van very well. I remember the beginning, and I remember just getting lost. Yeah, but it's a reporter in Voice Without a Shadow anyway.
There's a couple, the private detectives, reporters, cops, whatever. They're concerned family members. They all end up fulfilling the same role in these movies. But there's a line where the main character is interviewing this person trying to get to the bottom of this mystery, and the person goes, "Do you like mystery novels? Carr, Queen, Irish? Their work is so wonderfully convoluted." And that's the one moment in the movie where I was like, is that Seijun Suzuki just sort of thumbing his nose at the whole enterprise of making this? But he didn't write the script and whatever. It's not interesting in the way that Tokyo Drifter or Branded to Kill would be. Right. And then after Take Aim at the Police Van, you have a chronological list. What's the next movie chronologically that you've seen? Take Aim at the Police Van, by the way, is 1960, so we've jumped ahead a bit.
I don't have the list in front of me because the thing that I would be using to look it up, we're using to record. But I mean, the next one that I wanted to talk about, I think we might have even passed it, is the other one that I thought would go well with Voice Without a Shadow, which is called. I always get it confused. I think it's Passport to Darkness.
Okay, I didn't realize that was available to be seen.
It wasn't. It was the only way that I saw it was that was the one that I made on the 35 millimeter.
Oh, right, sure. So tell me about Passport to Darkness. That's 1959, so we did skip that one.
Passport to Darkness is, I mean, the thing that I think is interesting is because you say not engaged with the characters, but I mean, when you talk about that, I would wonder, like, what's your criteria for being engaged with the characters? Because I think Passport to Darkness is a really great, like, prototypical film noir. And but I suppose that I enjoy that movie mostly on the level of spectacle and thrills. Like I don't need it to be much deeper than that if it's like a pulpy sort of movie.
Sure.
This one's about a trumpet player in a jazz club, and he's about to get engaged, or he's engaged and he's about to get married, and on the day that he's going to get married, or the day that he's like the day before he's about to be married, his wife or his would-be wife is murdered, and he sets out to find who killed her and solve the mystery. And I just remember there's this great part where he's ultimately wrangled it so, like, because he knows the killer must have been at the nightclub that he plays at, and so he sets up this gambit where he's going to play the song that they loved, and there's the chance that at the end of the song that the guy's going to show up and kill him. And so that's the thing that sticks out in my head, is this really amazing, like really B thriller scene where he's in the jazz club and he's playing the song, and you're just wondering, you know, is this guy going to pop up, like, because he could get shot at any moment. And I just remember that one really being thrilling in a very simple, straightforward way. I don't know that it had a whole lot of, like, later Suzuki would get into avant-garde flourishes. I think it has some of his more fundamental tricks, like the way his camera moves. And it's not, when I say the way his camera moves, you know, I talk about making the most out of the sets, but I think he's also just very good at, like, establishing information really quickly through these surprisingly simple shots. Like, I don't know what it is about modern movies, like maybe it's just seeing a lot of those and, you know, quick cutting and changing angles, and somehow it gets confusing. But I feel like one of Suzuki's great skills is just these really simple, like almost comic book level compositions to just tell you everything you need to know. It might have been that one where there's this scene where the main character is sitting at the bar, and he's looking at somebody on his left, and then somebody important walks in, and the camera spins all the way around. It does a 180 to look at that character sitting in the background, sitting at a table, like on the other side of a partition, and so, like, you're watching this thing that the main character isn't seeing, but is crucial to the telling of the story. And it's like little things like that really jump out at me when I'm watching Suzuki.
I do, yeah. I think maybe now would be a good time to talk about his general overall style. We talked about his movement of the camera. I think, so before I started this, I always sort of instinctually associated Seijun Suzuki with Takashi Miike. And so, like, I grew up in, you know, I was born 1987. So, like, by the time I started getting interested in strange films, cult films or whatever, like, the number one name in extreme transgressive / cult / whatever you want to call psychotronic, like, world cinema was Takashi Miike. That was like the height. That was Ishii the Killer. It was well after Audition, but it was like Happiness of the Katakuris. That was when it seemed like every single, because this was also part of The Ring and The Grudge and every J horror movie coming to America, at least on home video. It seemed that every other month some new Takashi Miike movie was hitting the video store, and the thing that, other than sort of taking on a lot of projects that they have little creative input on a fundamental level as far as like screenplay and originating the project and everything, they're both very prolific. I think probably Takashi Miike still is, but he has sort of exited the point where most of his films come to America in some form. But they also broke taboos, and they very strange artistic flourishes. And another thing about them that makes the preparing for this episode a little frustrating, or I should say specifically about Seijun Suzuki, is every interview Seijun Suzuki downplays his role as an artist. He doesn't like to talk about his political intent. He doesn't like to talk about, what he was going for. He makes these films, especially later in his career, that are so provocative and strange. You want to know where they came from. You want to have the full story of like, what is Branded to Kill? Like, what the fuck? Like, you don't just accidentally make Branded to Kill. But Seijun Suzuki's very coy in interviews and always, he's like, well, I just wanted to interest myself as I was doing these movies, and it was just a job to me. And, and so they're both sort of befuddling auteurs in that way. But one fundamental stylistic thing that links Takashi Miike and Seijun Suzuki to me is that their films are almost always entirely made of master shots, which is to say there's no coverage, there's no cutting back and forth. If you watch a Seijun Suzuki movie, like just muted, and you're just paying attention to the shots, the camera setups, he almost never cuts back to a setup that you previously seen. He only goes forward. He never, there's not just establishing shots, there's not reverse shot when people are having conversations. He almost always cuts to every time there's a cut, it's almost always to a camera angle that we haven't seen before.
And I don't know what you would say about Miike, but I mean, it really feels like a part of Suzuki's style, though you could also wonder if it stems from just not having enough time to do that kind of
I mean, that's a fundamental part of it, absolutely, and I think probably for both of them, is that they're working very quickly with a limited budget, and they're coming up with ideas on set as opposed to, very tightly constructed storyboards. So a lot of it is just, flying by the seat of their pants, getting the stuff they can get. And part of that is what makes their movies so chaotic and exciting, especially when they're really leading into it, in films like Tokyo Drifter and Branded to Kill and stuff like that. But also when it comes to meat and potatoes, nuts and bolts of a mystery film, like Take Aim at the Police Van, like the film he made after Take Aim at the Police Van, The Sleeping Beast Within, it's really difficult to follow the plot. You're really fighting it because things aren't necessarily, like you did bring up, the sort of way he presents all the information that you need to know in Passport to Darkness in a single shot. I will argue that he often does the opposite in some other movies. And I think Take Aim at the Police Van is one example. I think Sleeping Beast Within is another, where you feel like you're fighting against the filmmaking, just trying to follow what's going on. And when the movie is surreal and when it's avant-garde, then it's cluing you in that actually you don't need to worry about the mystery. It doesn't matter. Like, stop worrying about that. But in these early films, when he hasn't yet reached that point, it makes them really baffling. And so The Sleeping Beast Within is a film about a daughter whose father comes home, I think, from a journey to America, and he's just acting very strangely, and he retires from his job, but then he disappears for a week, and she's trying to figure out where he goes, and he comes back, and he's just very coy about where he's been. And her boyfriend / friend / a family friend is a reporter, so they sort of become the detectives, because all these films have a detective protagonist, and they're trying to figure out what happened with him. And they're little bits and pieces, they're little moments, like they're interviewing someone at this bar, and she's recounting the story of this girl's father being at this bar with these, shadowy gangster types. And as she's recounting this, the camera sort of pans to the left, and it does sort of a thing. I think Edgar Wright did it in like Scott Pilgrim or whatever, where all the lights in the bar fade down and then it dissolves in, like it sort of does a double exposure, where her memories like fade in onto the left side of the frame, where it's a combination of optical and like actual stage lighting technique. That's really cool. And there's a couple moments. I think the ending is really kind of spectacular. I can't recall it at the moment, but in my notes, I wrote down that a spectacular fiery ending, but I saw it like 3 months ago now. But like on a fundamental level, I just couldn't enjoy it because it's just, I feel like Seijun Suzuki doesn't care enough about this. Like, so when I talk about him not caring about the characters, not caring about the story, I mean, he doesn't find a way to, he presents the scenes as they were probably in the script and they follow one another, but there's not a real through line. There's not like a sense of logic that good mysteries need to have for you to follow them.
That's interesting because I would say that if I'm not talking about something like Taking Him to the Police Van, which I just didn't like, if I'm talking about something that I sort of liked, like 8 Hours of Terror, I feel like there are scenes like that the movie has enough. There are certainly scenes in 8 Hours of Terror that I found were a drag, that I didn't think anything particular interesting was going on, but I did feel like the overall experience of the movie pulled me along. Like there was enough interesting characters or enough scenes in which I had something to hold on to or that I found gripping, that the overall experience of the movie was enjoyable, even if I thought it could have been shorter.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's like it's a thing, and then like I've already talked about how I'm not hot on Seijun Suzuki, so just to make me like full blown uncool cinephile, I'm gonna go ahead and also say I'm not a big fan of Dario Argento, and I have a sort of similar problem where like there are scenes in Dario Argento movies where it's like this is the scene Dario Argento cared about, and there are scenes in Dario Argento movies where you're like, oh, he didn't give a fuck about this. Like he barely showed up to shoot this scene of bad like sex comedy jokes of these two characters who are going through like the most basic exposition ever. In movies like Deep Red or even Tenebrae, there's just like a lot of stuff that like you can just tell, or I feel, at the very least I should say, that Argento did not give a shit about, and I feel that a lot with Seijun Suzuki and these early films. And it's just this thing where it's like I'm sticking around because I know something interesting is going to happen because he's just sort of a natural artist who has good ideas, and I don't know. I just because someone like him presents himself as sort of as a naive outsider artist. Like I think it can be easy to dismiss the work he puts into it, and it can be easy to dismiss like artistic labor and vision by saying like, oh, Seijun Suzuki's just a fucking crazy man, and he just has a fucking crazy idea and throws it on screen. So, like he doesn't even know what he's doing. Like, I don't want to, even though that's the way it can feel sometimes, I think that's probably almost never true when it comes to art. Just because you can't sense the effort that went into something doesn't mean there wasn't effort that went into it. Probably a tremendous amount of effort given the amount of like the small amount of time he was given to do it. But at any rate, like the thing that keeps me bouncing off most of these films, even the films I kind of like 8 Hours of Terror, or The Boy Who Came Back, is that feeling of, I guess the best word I used earlier is just aloof. Like it feels like Seijun Suzuki is very aloof, when making these films.
I don't know if there's enough of a difference, but I would probably be more inclined to go with functional. That he gets it on the screen.
But like to me, functional is like you can follow the story. Like I watched The Sleeping Beast Within, and like 30 minutes in, I was struggling to remember what character was who and why this piece of information, like why it suddenly zoomed in on an object, and I'm like, wait, what is the significance of that object? I should also say, like full, I don't know, like what's the point of doing this, this podcast, this work of criticism, if you can't just be honest about your actual reactions to these movies and be honest about yourself and your own shortcomings in viewing them. The other thing about watching, this is true in a lot of foreign films, which is just that I don't speak the language, and therefore I have trouble telling people apart because, like, I can't identify them by their voice. And if it's a black and white film where a bunch of actors are all dressed similar, and I can't really pick out one voice from another because I can't pick out the fine details of that from a language I don't speak. That's going to be an uphill battle when you're watching a sort of convoluted mystery film.
The thing that helps me is that Suzuki does have a pretty reliable roster of, he uses the same people over and over again. So for me, at least, when I watch enough of them, then I start to recognize. I don't even need to know, like, because I can't remember any of these people's names. Like, names I'm really bad with in general, but I can't remember the actors' names for the most part. But I can remember I saw that person in a different Seijun Suzuki movie. And then, when I was watching 8 Hours of Terror, for example, I was looking at these people, and a lot of them have distinct enough looks that it's easy to sort of imagine who the American actor would be if they remade it. So that's the thing that I kind of do in general.
That's your memory device, is like, oh, that guy looks like Japanese Jimmy Stewart.
Yeah, the guy specifically in 8 Hours of Terror, the lingerie salesman. I kept thinking this is the Japanese Thomas Lennon. If they made this movie now, they would cast Thomas Lennon in that role.
But funny.
Yeah, I just generally remember them from other Suzuki movies.
Mm-hmm. It's also possible. Like, it's also fully possible. Like, I'm just a fucking white dude who's racist, who can't pick out actors. Like, I definitely saw 3 Joe Shishido films before I realized that he was in all of them. I would
have thought the cheekbones would have been a giveaway.
That's the craziest thing, is that it's like he has the weirdest looking face, and it still just did not register to me. And part of it is that these viewings are spread across multiple months instead of one right after another.
Whereas I got him in right here at the end, one after another. I delayed. Some of the delay here was that I just couldn't, for some reason, I just didn't feel like getting started. And then finally I was like, okay, I'm just going to watch one of them. Yeah. And I watched one of them, and then I was off to the races. But I think what I was going to do is I was going to jump ahead a little bit. I think we're close to it anyway. But the first Seijun Suzuki film, the one that got my attention, that I think is probably a really good primer for the things that Seijun Suzuki is really good at, is Youth of the Beast. And I was wondering, did you got a chance to see that one?
Where? Hold on, I'm trying to figure out if Youth of the Beast came before or after Detective Bureau 2-3.
I think it was the same year. They both came out in the same year.
Okay,
we can talk about both of them at the same time.
Youth of the Beast is another film that I watched like the first maybe 45 minutes or so of at the very beginning of this year, before I knew we were going to be doing this episode, and I sort of could not follow it. I could not get into the plot at all. I agree with you. Like, a lot of the stuff that would pop up in Tokyo Drifter and Branded to Kill, like a lot of that feeling is in Youth of the Beast, but like I just could not get into it. So I did not watch Youth of the Beast, I would say.
I can get into Youth of the Beast. I mean, so I had no notion of Suzuki. I bought Youth of the Beast on sale at a whim, just because it was the Criterion, and I thought, this is on sale. It doesn't matter what it is. Even if I hate it, I could get rid of it, and I would probably make money. So I watched it, and I was just really struck by Youth of the Beast. I find that Youth of the Beast is like a really great. It's not. I mean, you had trouble following it. I find that some of his, like, you know, if you jump in at Branded to Kill, you're just going to be way into the deep end. I think Youth of the Beast is a pretty great pulpy action movie in the vein of like Django, because it's about this guy played by Joe Shishido, who shows up out of the blue. He shows up out of the blue, and he infiltrates this gang. He just, like, you're sort of kept in the dark, so I can see why you might have been confused. You're kept in the dark for a little while about why he's doing this. But it turns out that he was a friend and a coworker of this other cop who got murdered. And the murder was made to look like a suicide, but he knows that it wasn't. He knows that somebody in this gang is responsible. And he not only infiltrates one gang, but he also infiltrates the competitive gang so that he can play both of them against one another. And he does, you know, you get to see, like, the trick you described where he dims the lights. There's this scene near the beginning of the movie where the brother of the lead gangster is torturing this woman who's, like, really tripping. Like, she's having withdrawal syndromes from, like, opium or whatever. And there's this amazing bit where he's dangling the package of drugs in front of her to get her attention. And it cuts to this, it does a crossfade with this scene of him, like, skipping off into the distance, which is her vision of how he's running away, but he's just walking down the stairs. Things like that. And it's got these little colorful details, like the rival gangster. His headquarters is in the back of a movie, like why am I blanking on the word? A theater. And so whenever he goes to that gangster's place, you can see the images playing on the screen in the background behind him. And I find that movie particularly funny. I think it's a really good Joe Shishido performance. It's got really great, colorful characters. I think that one has a particularly good script in terms of giving each character a really striking personality. And yeah, I think it's just Youth of the Beast is a really good example of everything he does well. And it's one of the ones, and it seemed to be totally dictated by budget, but it's one of the ones that's in color. So you get even more layers of being able to differentiate the characters, because he has this tendency to keep the characters in the same costumes, like a cartoon, so that whenever you see that character show up, you can remember, oh, that's the guy in the crimson suit, and you sort of get used to that as the movie goes on. But yeah, I think Youth of the Beast is really a really great B picture, and I think it's also interesting as a counterpoint to the one that you did see, and I think you liked more than Youth of the Beast, which is the Detective Bureau 2-3, which I also really enjoy.
Yeah, I really, this is definitely like one of my favorite Seijun Suzuki films. Detective Bureau 2-3 : Go to Hell, Bastards. Which is a terrific title. I mean, there's a ton of really good titles in Seijun Suzuki's filmography. You want to just scroll across his IMDb. I don't know if IMDb lists translated titles or not, but
the one that I want to, the one, it's one of his youth pictures, and he did two of them, but I think they're called Young Breasts. I think that's the name of those movies, and I'm like, what is that about?
He did Young Breasts, which apparently, I did look it up. Young Breasts is another, like, it's basically the same as The Boy Who Came Back, where it's like a social worker and a juvenile delinquent. It sounds like something that should put you on a watch list, but I think it is actually just a very generic sort of drama. The Wind of Youth Group Crosses the Mountain Pass. That's a good one.
Yeah.
But okay, so Detective Bureau 2-3 Go to Hell Bastards is the movie that made me sort of sit up and recognize Joe Shishido. And even though I had already seen Branded to Kill, I think that whole movie is so nuts that like he's only a blip on it, and he kind of fits into it in a way that you don't realize. So I don't want to body shame anybody, but it was the 60s and cosmetic surgery was not what it is now. And Joe Shishido was an actor who thought he would get better roles if he had more prominent cheekbones. So he had a cosmetic surgery on his face, and the result is he looks. I didn't get body shaming.
Most people describe him as chipmunk cheeked.
Chipmunk cheeked. He looks like a Dick Tracy character, like an illustration come to life.
And I think what's interesting is that across the movies that they made together, I mean, Seijun Suzuki uses him in a lot of different contexts, and I think he's pretty good in all of them. And the Detective Bureau 2-3 is especially delightful because he gets to really play pure comedy. I mean, for me, the highlight of the movie, both times that I watched it, because I watched it again before recording, is when he does a song and dance routine. It's just like amazing.
So the thing about Seijun Suzuki is, his good crime movies can often feel like parodies of crime movies. They feel like they exist to take the piss out of the genre they're in. And Joe Shishido, with his weird grimace and his weird face, and he just has a really strange screen presence. Like, he feels like a parody of masculinity in that same way. Like, he feels like the grim, sort of hyper competent uber male, like, taken to a laughable degree, to the point where it is just comedy. So he fits in these movies. Like, he fits in Branded to Kill perfectly. He fits in Detective Bureau 2-3 perfectly. Gate of Flesh, his role in that film, like, that presence is just perfect. But the other thing about Detective Bureau 2-3 is he's a detective. He's like a private detective who's working in conjunction with the police. But it's an undercover movie. And I love undercover movies. And it's an undercover movie that it has a good story. Like, Seijun Suzuki's, this is in dramatic contrast to some of his earlier stuff. This is, by the way, 1963. Is Youth of the Beast and Detective Bureau 2-3. So we're getting into, this is the era of Seijun Suzuki that he is known for. I just think, like, the writing is sharper. There's the twists in the story are good in a way that they're not just good because they're strange. They're good because you don't see them coming, and they have good character moments. He has a bunch of really good character moments, but there is that absurdity to it. So, like, one of the things about Yakuza movies, about Japan in general, is, unlike America, Japan has strict gun laws. So Yakuza movies often have people fighting with swords. There's not a lot of, it's not just like big gunfights all the time. Japanese cinema doesn't really have that tradition of gunfights the way American cinema does with westerns and gangster movies and stuff like that. But in Detective Bureau 2-3, because everything is just turned up to 10 all the time, there is just this early sequence where this guy who may or may not have snitched to the cops, but nonetheless is wanted dead by like 100 different gangs, is being released from prison. And there's just 100 conflicting gangs that all descend upon this area outside this prison and have this insane gunfight. And it is just 5 straight minutes of like extras firing blanks. And it is so hilarious and absurd. It's like the scene in Predator where they're just shooting into the jungle for 3 minutes. Like, it's so ridiculous, especially in the context of Japanese film where you don't see this kind of gunplay a lot. It is that sort of parody of action movie. It's that parody of masculinity. And there's a couple sequences like that are just the action sequence taken so far. It's almost like there's a scene where Joe Shishido and the female lead sort of get trapped and they have to get themselves out. And it feels like particularly because of the vibrant colors. This is another early color film of his, particularly because of the vibrant colors and Seijun Suzuki's sort of pop art aesthetic. Like, it feels like an episode of the 60s Batman TV show sometimes.
And yeah, it's like, and the scene you describe, I mean, it's just full on, like, almost like airplane level absurdity. And I find that very entertaining. You know, it makes me wish that he did more pure comedies, because I think Detective Bureau 2-3, I mean, it does have a pretty good crime story in it, but I would still probably classify it as a comedy more than anything.
Yeah, I think it is an action comedy. I think it is, like, it's intentionally funny in the way that, you know, like the 60s Batman TV show is intentionally funny.
Right.
It's not quite as campy, but it is, like, it's up there. And it's just, like, really thoroughly well made and entertaining. And it's this sort of, like, alternate, I don't know how it did, like, box office wise. I don't know if it was actually a hit or not, but, like, it's this other glimpse into maybe Seijun Suzuki could have been someone who balanced his own weird sensibility with, with studio demands and made very idiosyncratic, but still not necessarily subversive, not necessarily challenge. Like, it's entertaining, but it's not necessarily challenging in a way that Branded to Kill is. Mm-hmm. And it's like this alternate career he could have had is making these Detective Bureau movies. And, you know, there's a bunch of films he made in the early to mid 60s that I haven't seen. So for all I know, he made a handful of them. But
and he certainly seems aware of, you know, how this comes off. 'Cause like the opening scene, which is a heist, it's like a bunch of, criminals. And at one point, like, they come in a hijacked Pepsi truck. And so it's the scene of them shooting up the Pepsi bottles, and that feels like a real wink at the audience as to what the movie do.
I you know, like I said, like we said at the start, we're not experts on Japanese history or Japanese culture or Japanese film, but I will say, like, one of the easiest things for a Japanese artist to do post-war is to, like, just have images of American imperialism in the form of, like, Coca-Cola ads or Pepsi bottles and stuff. Like, Ozu movies are full of fucking, like, Coca-Cola ads. And it's because all of Ozu movies are, like, about post-war trauma and stuff like that. And yeah, there's definitely, we'll talk about that in a bit, because Gate of Flesh.
Yeah, that makes a good segue into Gate of Flesh.
Because Gate of Flesh is, like, what, like, you want to talk about trauma, like, Gate of Flesh is one of the of all of the many Japanese new wave I mean, and films that you wouldn't consider part of that sensibility about post World War II and about Japan as a nation dealing with its role in World War II and what it meant and how it got there and where it can go from there. Gate of Flesh is just fucking brutal.
Mm-hmm. And I think Gate of Flesh, I mean, most of the movies that Seijun Suzuki made, even if they are dramatic, they're still generally sort of fun. I feel like Gate of Flesh is probably the one that's, like, pure drama. So it's like a real counterpoint to Detective Bureau 2-3.
Yeah, I mean, I would characterize something like The Boy Who Came Back as pure drama, but The Boy Who Came Back is pure drama in a very unengaged, generic kind of way, whereas Gate of Flesh is pure Suzuki, but it's very subversive, it's very challenging, it's very thorny and difficult and full of weird aesthetic touches, but he is not taking the piss out of these characters or the situation. He is fully engaged with the material in a way that he is not always.
It's an angry movie, and
very.
It's got these really great performances from the four women who play it's about these four women who are prostitutes in post-war, like this bombed out area. You were talking earlier about how, you know, the Boy Who Returned, is that what it's called?
Yeah, Boy Who Came Back.
the boy who came back, how he used the natural projections design. But I think Gate of Flesh is a really interesting, like, intentionally. Some of it looks really intentionally artificial. Like the bombed out buildings have a sort of old Western artificiality to them that I find very interesting. But yeah, it's about these 4 prostitutes, and there's a character played by Joe Shishido. He is a returner. He came back from the war, and it's kind of like, the soldiers who came back from Vietnam, which is that the people were not a fan of them because it's like they lost or something. So they came back, and his only choice is to turn to petty crime. So he steals a bunch of penicillin, and he gets into a fight with an American soldier, and he stabs him in the leg. And so now the American police and the Japanese police are both on the lookout for him. And so he shacks up with these prostitutes. And the movie has sort of this, it's like a battle between the rage that they feel and like the people who want things to return to the way they were before. There's a 5th prostitute who's like pining for marriage. Like, she doesn't really want to be doing this, but she doesn't have a choice. And they don't like her because she clearly has this streak of conservatism that's going to fuck up their whole business. Their one rule is like don't sleep with anyone for free, and they get the impression that because she wants to be married and have that traditional life, that she's probably going to be the one to break the rule. But then Joe Shishido comes in, and he's a real catalyst. Like, he sets them all off. It's
a very Beguiled kind of setup.
Oh yeah.
Where he's injured when he was on the run from the police. He gets injured, and he sort of hides out with them. And yeah, obviously he is this, and to Suzuki's credit, this is a very kinky movie. This is a movie with a lot of sweaty, nearly nude or nude women being tied up and beaten and whipped and stuff like that. But to his credit, Joe Shishido's body is also objectified and sweaty, and because it's so important to the story that he be this sex object for these women to sort of disintegrate over. His body is shot in very provocative close-ups as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's an interesting movie because it's a movie about this feeling of whatever we thought of as society, whatever we thought of as Japanese culture, whatever we thought of as the way things operated, they led us to World War II. They led us to national shame and defeat and ruin and, rationing and this occupation by this foreign army and all of this awful stuff. So there is this sort of radical political mood to it, which is these women who are the idea of like you were saying, one of their rules is they can't have sex for free. They have to pay for money. It's about sort of radically recontextualizing what you can get from a society and what society wants out of you, and this sort of nihilistic approach to it, which is personified in Joe Shishido's character, who he goes into these speeches about all he cares about is eating food and fucking, and and the reason you live is because that's what allows you to eat food and fuck, and but the movie does not necessarily take his side. The movie is about sort of how impossible it is to reconcile being a human being in a terrible situation where you can't be a traditional person with traditional beliefs and traditional morals and ideals because you're just going to starve. But at the same time, the new belief systems and the new rules that you have set up for yourself, and this sort of co-op of prostitutes who have sort of come together in order to lift each other up, they're also doomed because they are trading in one oppressive system for another. So it's very engaged politically, and really interesting, and it doesn't get preachy, it doesn't get didactic, because it is also this like super high powered melodrama where it's almost like a Tennessee Williams play or something, where just everyone is hot and sweaty and they all have tragic backstories and they're all just sexually frustrated. And then also like it has that side of it where there are just scenes of like women being tied up and hung from the ceiling and like whipped and dangled and spun around. Like it's really kinky. Like this is a movie that, you know, it came out in 1964. So even in Japanese cinema in 1964, it was breaking boundaries.
Yeah, the subplot about what happens to the one priest is just like, oh, geez.
Yeah. There's another aspect of that, which is that, and again, I'm unqualified to speak on, because I'm not an expert on Japanese culture and Japanese history and everything. But the priest, who is a sort of American GI, who's a priest, is black, and I know that there's some culturally, there's a lot of. I don't want to speak too much on it because I can't speak comprehensively on it, but like I never quite know where Suzuki is coming from when he casts like black actors, or like when it's revealed in 8 Hours of Terror that the prostitute was in love with a black GI specifically. Like I never know if he's trying to point out racism in society or if it's just he is part of that society, so he's racist and is not familiar with African Americans, or like what's going on. Like, I don't know. I can't quite unpack that one.
I would be inclined to say that based on the other politics that are expressed in his movies, that he is pointing out racism. But I mean, I wouldn't know for sure either.
I mean, there's also like, okay, so you can call him a leftist politically, like just to put it in pretty vague terms.
Yeah.
But you know, his movies also feature a lot of very violent fantasy, like sexual fantasies against women, and a lot of like just objectified women, and like I can't fully unpack all of this, so I hesitate even bringing it up or whatever. But I think it can be a mistake to assume that because someone is on the left that they can't also have all this other sort of problematic shit running through. And like when I watch Branded to Kill, like that to me is a movie that does not that does not have very good portrayals of women.
I don't know. I think Branded to Kill is interesting. I don't know if you want to get into it already or not. But,
no, we can save that. And certainly Gate of Flesh does not have that same problem, but Gate of Flesh is also a scene again with like just a lot of kinky sadomasochistic sexual moments. And you know, Seijun Suzuki is not the primary screenwriter of any of his films, so
it feels like Gate of Flesh sort of splits the difference. Like it is very kinky, but I feel like, you know, he casts the nudity in a lot of shadow. The movie does not have a lot of nudity in it, even though characters are naked. He uses shadow to obscure that kind of stuff. I mean, you can still see it, but I feel like the movie is making a statement about how this is meant to be, like you say, it's meant to be kinky or extreme, but it's also not meant to be exploitative.
I mean, is he putting them in shadow because he doesn't want to be objectifying, or is he putting them in shadow because it's 1964 and he can't get away with as much nudity as he would be able to 3 years later when Branded to Kill just has none of that? The full, like it is full nude female shapes all the time, like in Gate of Flesh, like whether or not it's lit so you can't quite see their nipples, like I don't know, like it's, and I mean I'm not saying that hurts the film necessarily. Like part of what makes that movie so interesting to me is that it's complicated And
I do agree that it's complicated. That it has sort of a political viewpoint that, or it seems to have a political viewpoint that it then undercuts. And I think you were getting to the heart of it. That it's like that the things that they want to do and the way they're going about it, they just can't be reconciled. So I find that interesting.
Right. It's just like all the characters just exist in a world where everything has to be transactional. And it's probably less about his view of the world in general and more about his view of post-war Japan specifically.
Right.
Also, like, we're not Japanese historical experts. We're not experts on Japanese culture. So there might be very specific things that he is commenting on and referencing that completely went over our heads.
The way I would, I mean, just for context, what I would have said is that my point of view would be that because he gets away with more nudity in Branded to Kill, then I would assume that he's doing it on purpose in Gate of Flesh, because it's not so much of a time gap that I think the whole culture would have shifted. But that's just me reasoning it out. I don't know that.
I mean, that's all. But also, like, Branded to Kill is the movie that got him fired. And he didn't specifically get fired because there was too much nudity, but like Branded to Kill was an outrageous movie that none of the female actors at Nikkatsu wanted to be in because of all the nudity. And the same thing is true of Gate of Flesh. So like, I think that he was pushing boundaries and he knew how far he could push those boundaries. It's like Russ Meyer, where it's like Russ Meyer is absolutely objectifying the women in his films, but there was a period of time when he couldn't get away with having them nude, and there was a period of time when he could. And, you know, you can watch Super Vixens and you can watch Lorna back to back, and he has the same interest in women and their breasts, but like one of them, he's going to have them more nude, and it's just a matter of time and context. But I can't really speak to that. Like, it's just, I'm just talking about the feelings I had watching the film. I'm just trying to be honest about like how I felt reacting to the movie, as opposed to stating in absolute terms what the movie is or isn't.
And for the record, some of the comments that you've made, like, I don't want to come off like I think it's a better discussion if you have a different opinion than I do. So it's not like I'm gonna feel like I wasted $50 or something because you didn't like.
I do. Movies. I mean, you did. You absolutely wasted $50, and you should be ashamed of yourself for saying anything positive about any of these films. But I mean, that's just your own cross to bear. I do want to say, no, because we'll get to it. We'll get to it when there's a couple other older films that we skip past, but I don't have a lot to say about them, so I'm just going to talk about them in context of films they remind me of. After Gate of Flesh, did you see Story of a Prostitute?
No, that's one of the ones that's on Filmstruck that I didn't get to.
And soon no one will be able to get to. I think, so let's see, Gate of Flesh is 1964. We get into 1965 with Tattooed Life.
I did see that one. That is a samurai picture that I don't have a lot of memory of, but I did like it.
Do you recall it feeling particularly Suzuki?
Yeah, it felt very Suzuki, even though it's the Samurai Pictures is obviously a pretty distinctly different, environment than the Gangster Pictures or even Gate of Flesh. But I remember it feeling very Suzuki.
Okay, so also 1960, we're going to go ahead to 1966 then with Tokyo Drifter.
Tokyo Drifter I really like, and that's one of the ones that I rewatched. And I guess the one observation that I had watching again is that I think that when I watched it the first time, I thought of it more in the vein of Youth of the Beast, which is just like a revenge picture, and that you're supposed to be sort of, that you're waiting for the guy to get revenge on all the people who wronged him. But I watched it this time, and I found it far more despairing or like tragic than I did the first time. And I also was not aware that they did it to sell that song, but that makes a lot of sense because they play it like 18 times during the movie.
Yeah. Tokyo Drifter is an interesting movie. I also So my first real Suzuki experience, my very first Suzuki experience was when I was like 15 and I rented Pistol Opera from the library and I sort of watched the first 20 minutes and said, what the fuck is this? And that movie is actually a sequel of some sorts to Tokyo Drifter, but obviously I had no context for Seijun Suzuki or Tokyo Drifter or anything. And I just found it baffling and I was 15 and bored, so I just turned it off. My next experience with Seijun Suzuki was, I think they were also doing a retrospective of some sort at the Gene Siskel Film Center here in Chicago, and I saw a double feature of Tokyo Drifter and Fighting Elegy. So seeing Tokyo Drifter in 35 millimeter on the big screen, it being my first Suzuki experience, it was absolutely dazzling. It's all like the colors are incredible. It's very strange. It starts off in black and white and then moves into color. It has a weird self-referential thing. At the time I thought was weird. Now I see it's a very standard Suzuki sort of self-referential thing where there's the woman the plot I can't even really recap, but she's like reading the manga about the Yakuza, and she's sort of just like laughing, and like as this Yakuza story is happening around her, and it's very clear that that's like Seijun Suzuki sort of pointing at the story and not, and saying how like sort of ridiculous it is and doing his typical sort of approach to crime films and stuff. So like my memory of Tokyo Drifter that first time is just like, wow, this is absurd. This is so crazy. This is absolutely ridiculous and nonsensical. And I sort of lumped it in with Branded to Kill. And then when I rewatched it for this, I was like, oh, actually he does, to an extent, for a portion of this film, he is dedicated to this story of someone trying to get out of the crime life and failing to, and like wanting revenge, and there are emotional stakes that he taps into.
Yeah, the way I would summarize the story is that there's an older, he used to be like a mobster, and he's gone straight, and he bought this building, but he borrowed some money to do it. And so this outside, so it's the guy who has the building and the guy who loaned him the money for the building, and they have a straight deal. Like, he's actually going to pay him back and everything. But this third gang comes in, and they basically play both sides. And they they make it seem like the guy who borrowed the money is ripping the other guy off, and vice versa, and it screws everything up. But in the middle of it, there's this young, idealistic gangster. Like, he's not a gangster, but he was a gangster, and he's sworn it off along with his boss, and he's very loyal to his boss. And the movie is about like all these other gangsters like sort of floating around, especially this one. I forget what his nickname was, but it had Star in it. But he's like, that guy's going to betray you. Like, that's just what's going to happen. Like, you shouldn't put so much faith in this father figure of yours because, it's like, we live the life of gangsters. He's probably going to turn on you. And that's sort of the dramatic hook of the story.
But that's also like the first 20 minutes.
Kind of. I mean, he doesn't actually get betrayed until like the last 20 minutes. So I see what you mean. Like, the middle section is him drifting away from the old man and sort of trying to find a new life. But he just moves from place to place. His girlfriend's like chasing him the whole way, and he's just trying to find like some other place that he can be happy because he can't be in this with his father figure.
So I wanted to talk a bit about Tokyo Nights, which is a Seijun Suzuki film from 1961. It's one of his youth films. It's about this kid who inherits this corporation from his father, or he inherits a Yakuza. The weird thing about this movie is the way it proceeds and the way the wording is. I couldn't tell if it was a legitimate business or a criminal organization. At any rate, one of the subplots is that this kid who inherits this organization is into No Theater, NOH Theater. Are you familiar with No Theater?
I read about it in one of these, like I read the booklets that came with the Criterion DVDs and stuff, but I don't remember the context.
Okay, so I also could not give you a proper synopsis of No Theater other than it just being a traditional, very heightened Japanese theater style, and if you want to know more, you should probably just look up No on Wikipedia. But at any rate, when I saw that in Tokyo Nights, part of me wondered how much Seijun Suzuki is inspired by it. Tokyo Drifter, we talked a lot about the sort of theatrical effects in like Gate of Flesh, and even sort of some of the lighting tricks he does in some of his early, less distinct films. But like Tokyo Drifter feels like the most theatrical. It feels, Seijun Suzuki, a lot of his sort of strange aesthetic flourishes, they happen both as sort of opticals using dissolves and flashes of other images and dividing up the frame in strange ways and stuff like that. But he also does a lot of stuff on stage, the way the sets are designed and the way, in Tokyo Nights, there's a club one of the scenes takes place in, and there's just giant, insane, billowing red velvet curtains behind everyone. And it's very hard to understand, like, what that's actually supposed to be in the world of the film. And, like, Tokyo Drifter is that, especially the second half of Tokyo Drifter, is that, like, stretched to infinity. Like, it's very theatrical, and the set design and the art direction is so wild.
It gets even more. I feel like the finale is really the peak of that, but it's like there's a lot of stuff. I mean, it has its own ridiculous club, which is called like the sewer or something, and it's just like a bunch of pipes on the walls, which is kind of funny. And like the main character, he does that thing where the character basically wears the same costume again the whole movie, but because this is a story about the character being disillusioned, he goes from wearing this blue suit to wearing a gray suit to wearing a white suit over the course of the movie. And a lot of it takes place in this other club set where his girlfriend performs, and the club, like the lighting of the club will change drastically based on the mood of the scene. And that's very striking. And like even when you're talking about that woman who was reading the Yakuza comic book, as the Yakuza stuff happens around her, like she gets shot, and there's this scene where there's this shot where the gangster who was her boyfriend like runs over, and behind in the background of the scene is this white window. Like you don't even know what it is. It's just white. It doesn't show you the outside or anything. And when she gets shot, it turns blood red and things like that. And the visuals of this movie are very striking. A whole section of it takes place in the snow, so that adds even more visual interest. And you get more of this the chaotic battles that you were talking about. There's one where it's guns and swords versus each other, like this whole fight scene, and it's shot kind of like the hallway scene in Old Boy, where it's just a side view of this building, and you can see people on both levels of it, and things like that.
All the gun muzzle flashes are like a bright red. I don't know if that was done optically or done on set, but like it's one of the craziest looking things I've ever seen, and it's so cool. And I've never seen anyone fuck around with like the muzzle flash of a gun in any other movie.
It looks like a flare gun, basically.
Yeah, if you look at the poster, or at least like the Criterion disc cover, it's featured prominently, and it's just really cool looking and strange. But I will say, all of this artificiality, first time I saw this movie, it dazzled me, and especially seeing it on the big screen, not being prepared for it. Like, I really loved this movie when I first saw it. The second time through, I really liked it when, in the first part, when I was still following the story of this character and this sort of double cross and the real emotional stakes that I felt that sort of caught me by surprise. And then as soon as he left, as soon as he sort of actually became a drifter, like, I just got completely lost. I'm like, wait, why is this happening? Where is he? Who are these people? What is this new problem that he's part of? What is this club where this woman wants to dance with him while he's fighting these people? Like it was all way too much. And it was that thing where I just felt like, at a certain point, Suzuki disengaged with the actual character in the story, and he just was only cared about the aesthetic side of it.
I think what we're really learning is that I should just be there in person to help you through each of these movies.
Yeah, possibly. Like, yeah, it could possibly just be I can't follow them because I'm too slow or whatever.
Well, and this one really sticks in the knife because there's a character named Tetsu and there's a character named Tatsu, which is just like the ultimate fuck you to trying to keep things straight.
I guess so. I definitely, I could follow the broad strokes, but like there's just something very, I don't know. It's too much of a crime film to be an art film for me. And then it's not enough of a crime film. Like, there's such something kind of weirdly, vaguely unsatisfying about Tokyo Drifter for me. As many of its individual elements as I could single out as being dazzling and incredible. And this is also true of Branded to Kill. Much more so for Branded to Kill, where I got lost way earlier. But I think Suzuki can tell stories, and I think Suzuki doesn't always care to, and I think just my sensibilities, when he doesn't care to, I find it, I really struggle with them.
I think there's only about 2 movies left that we would be talking about, which you mentioned one of them already, which is Fighting Elegy, and then the other one would be Branded to Kill. I mean, what did you think of Fighting Elegy? I think Fighting Elegy is pretty coherent, and I think it's a very interesting story to watch now because it's about this young boy who is, I think is he Catholic?
Yes.
And he just has a crush on a girl, which is, a totally normal thing, but he is so repressed that he has no other outlet to put that repression into in his own mind. I mean, he could just ask her out and she would probably like it. But he doesn't have any outlet for that. So instead he turns to violence. And at first, like for the first maybe half of the movie, that's really funny because the violence is absurd. Like he's just like, it's really ridiculous to watch him do this. And somewhere around the midpoint, he starts to get radicalized in a very negative way. And then the movie becomes very dark. And I thought Fighting Elegy was very impressive.
Fighting Elegy is my favorite Seijun Suzuki movie. This is the other movie I saw, like, with Tokyo Drifter. And it is, you said, like, you wish that Seijun Suzuki did more straight comedies. And as dark as Fighting Elegy gets at the end, like, I really think that Fighting Elegy is a black comedy. Like, I think it is hilarious the whole way through, even when it gets into sort of thornier territory and darker implications. Like, everything about Fighting Elegy makes me laugh. And in a way that, like, honestly, just there are Japanese films that I find that funny. Like, my sensibility, my sense of humor, just in all of the, contemporary and classic Japanese films, in anime and whatever, like video games, whatever Japanese media I've consumed, like, the sense of humor is just a thing that I've just come to accept that I almost never connect with. And I think Fighting Elegy is so fucking funny. Fighting Elegy feels like a really dark version of Rushmore to me. It feels very Wes Anderson, especially early on when it's like still sort of doing these jump cuts and these montages of him training and stuff. And this, like, it has that Wes Anderson thing where there's a sense of whimsy to it, but there's a bite. like it's these gangs fighting, and it's like ridiculous how these student gangs are like battling each other. But when they do battle each other,
there's a scene where the gangs are really about to show down, and it's shot kind of like the ending of Yojimbo.
Yeah. But when they do fight, it's not just goofy. Oh, it's kids; they're bonking each other in the head. Like the violent, like it's really brutal in a way that like makes it funnier to me.
Right from the beginning, there's that scene where he's just being like kind of picked on by these boys in school, and he arranges this little stunt where he gets a guy to fall on his own cleats, like to sit on them, and it's like already that's like a little bit. There's a little bit of edge to it.
It's such a funny performance from Hideki Takahashi.
Mm-hmm.
Who I think was in several other Seijun Suzuki movies. I can't really name it at the moment. Anyway, apparently he was in Tattooed Life. But at any rate, like he as a portrait of sort of sexual repression run amok, it's just beautiful. It is like there's the scene where she's trying to teach him how to play piano, and it's like just her sort of guiding his hands over the keys is the most intense sexual experience this extremely horny boy has ever had. And it is just so insane. And you know, and like,
I wouldn't want to ruin the joke, but then there's the other piano scene.
Oh yeah, no, the other piano scene's an all-time classic, especially out of context. If you want to look up Fighting Elegy Piano, I think there is an out of context clip on YouTube that.
And I think the punchline of that scene, which is the cross on the wall, is just like that's perfect.
It's so like all the comedy is so well directed and visual in a way that a lot of comedy is not. But and like again, Seijun, he's this is the very end of his career, and he is or not the very end, because he came back 10 years after Branded to Kill and made more films. But like this is the end of this stage of his career, and he is full blown. You know, doing weird insert shots and graphics, and there's the scene where all the students are mocking the teacher, calling him a duck, and it keeps blocking one side of the frame and the other as they're like mocking him. There's just a lot of sequences that are about like 30 seconds long that feel just like perfectly constructed jokes on their own, but they all build together to tell this story of like sexual anxiety turning into militarism. And just unhealthy masculinity.
Yeah, and I had to read the booklet to understand what the joke was exactly, but then there's also the one where he ends up having to move to a new school, and he's listening to the people at this new school, like the authority figures at this new school talk, and every time they talk about, like, I think it's like the school pride or something, Suzuki cuts in on their mouth for like a second and then moves back. And that's really absurd and funny.
Yeah.
I mean, he keeps those kind of tricks to a relative minimum, because I think the movie was very cheap, so he didn't really have the freedom to do a lot of that kind of stuff. But he does get some of it in there, and
I mean, it's all just enhancement. It's none of it's distracting. It's all just. When it fits in that scene, that's when he goes for it. And yeah, it's really, I mean, it's hard for, I always have trouble talking about comedies because it's just me listing things I think are funny.
Right.
But, and it does have that same sort of, overall arcing theme as something like Doctor Strangelove or something, where it's just like, why are all these wars started? And it's just like, 'cause men are horny and don't know how to handle their emotions. Like it all segues into the February 26th incident, which I had to look up. Because I was not familiar with it beforehand, but it was basically an event in 1936 when there was like a lot of army officers who tried to stage a coup of the Japanese government.
Yeah, and then apparently it went very badly too. Like the end result was that sort of even more conservative government was installed. This is another thing that I learned from the booklet that came with the Criterion DVD, because I wouldn't have known any of that history either. It mentioned that this is one of the ones that, you talk about, and I don't have any, other than Fighting Elegy, I don't have any information that would state otherwise, but apparently he really heavily rewrote the script for this one himself, and then eventually he published it in a book, and it was the script that they published was definitely his and not the guy who actually wrote it or is credited as writing it. And he had even written a sequel that would have gone to the into the war that's being set up at the end.
Yeah,
it didn't.
That would have been incredible. Yeah, I also read that this was like the exception in Seijun Suzuki's career as far as like projects that he spearheaded as opposed to projects that got assigned to him. Though the next film we're going to talk about, Branded to Kill, was also the result of him sort of taking initiative because the studio had nothing for him.
And one of the things you said earlier that I thought was interesting is that that you were talking about how he doesn't like to talk about the impetus behind his work. And one of the things that I thought was interesting when I was watching Branded to Kill is that, I guess if you don't have any reason to believe otherwise, that leaves the insanity of Branded to Kill open to a lot of interpretations to be grafted onto it. So maybe that is one of the reasons that Branded to Kill endures so much. I do think Branded to Kill is pretty much I said that Youth of the Beast is like a great starter film, and I think that Branded to Kill is similar in the sense that it really gets in all of the things that make Suzuki, but it's really the advanced version where it's just like, it can be very hard to follow anything, and the movie is absurd, and it just jumps all over the place, and it really gets into some of that crazy comedy that I think is very funny, but it's just like over the top, and I would certainly say that there's not a whole lot of a thematic hook to hang on to, so maybe grafting these interpretations of what the movie is really about is the way that people deal with that it doesn't have any, it's hard to tell what's going on underneath what's happening on screen.
Yeah, Branded to Kill is a movie. I saw the first Criterion release, which is non-anamorphic, and not a great transfer just because it's the early days of DVDs. I saw that at the beginning of this year, and I watched it, and I was like, again, really enthusiastic, and I could tell that it was really good looking and interesting, and I just couldn't get a hold of it. And I said, well, once I watch a bunch of Seijun Suzuki movies, I'm going to return to Branded to Kill, and then I'll be able to form an opinion. But I'm pretty sure this movie's great, and I really like it. And then I watched it this time, and I could follow the plot 10 minutes in, and and then past that, I had no idea what was going on, and I didn't care, and it was just, it's stunning. And I watched the proper Criterion release, so I saw, a really good transfer of it, and there's the one shot where it's a rack focus past shower water / dissolve into a shot of light coming up on a woman's face. It's this absolutely insane moment of beauty, and there's a lot of amazing set design, like that room full of the butterflies, and there's a lot of really inventive, wild, awesome stuff, and I just did not give a fuck about any of it. And I think part of it is the stuff you found funny or whatever. I don't find Branded to Kill particularly funny.
The stuff that's funny to me comes in at the end, where the movie, to say that you could spoil this movie is kind of irrelevant. It's not really that kind of movie. It's about this hitman who is ranked, I think, number 3 of all the hitmen in I don't know, the world or Japan. It's not really important, but he's ranked number 3, and he's asked to do a job by some guy who's not professional, who's like drunk and he's like losing his shit, but he really needs the help. And so he takes this job, and as the job goes, sort of, you know, he's successful, but he loses that guy in the process, and a bunch of people die, and he starts to get like more work, but at a certain point he becomes neurotic about his position as a hitman. Like somebody keeps like asking him like, who's number one, and then he takes this job from this crazy woman that he meets in the middle of a storm, who has a death wish, and she wants this one guy to be killed, and so he takes the job even though the parameters of the job are so small that like there's really not a margin of error, and he gets fucked up because a butterfly lands on his sniper rifle at the moment he's taking the shot, which is just enough to put him off target. And it becomes this thing where he knows the number one hitman in the world is after him, and like the whole last half of the movie, or like maybe the last 30 minutes of the movie, is he meets the number one hitman in the world, and the number one hitman in the world like just like toys with them. Like there's a point at which they're sitting, like the number one hitman has entered his apartment and is sitting on the couch with him, and they're negotiating when the Joe Shishido character can go to the bathroom and stuff like that. And that kind of stuff is just like hilarious to me. Like the level of absurdity that the movie gets into at that point is ridiculous. And so Branded to Kill is crazy, and the interpretation that came to me this time, again, it's like if he won't say what his movie's about, you can sort of you can imagine they're about anything. And so I don't know that this is valid at all, but the way I watched it now was maybe sort of an anxiety from Suzuki about being the B-man, like this guy that, you know, has to be stuck on the second bill of a double feature where he knows the studio cares about the A picture and he's the other guy. And that was the way that I followed the movie through this time. I mean, that could be total bullshit, but it does make for sort of a funny way to watch the movie.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Like I was really looking for. I like that interpretation definitely occurred to me, and I was trying, but like on a moment to moment basis, I couldn't find like. So what is the Rice sequel? What is this? Like I couldn't make that meaningful. And I think this could be. I think there are movies that I find equally baffling. That I also think the plots are nonsensical and meaningless, and that the characters are kind of underwritten or whatever, that I just love. And I think this is like a sensibility thing where I just don't care for Branded to Kill. But yeah, like it's just one of those things with me with Seijun Suzuki in general, where I think he's very aloof. Like to me, Branded to Kill is a very aloof movie. And it's like he takes the whole idea of a hitman story as just being so ridiculous that why would anyone even make a straightforward hitman movie? Like, why would anyone take any of this seriously? It's just it almost, I don't know, like it feels like he has contempt for genre, which is like makes sense for a guy who for 10 years had to crank out like uninspired genre movies, of which I saw many, and like I saw them and I saw that they were not well written, and he still had to make them, so I can understand where that contempt would come from. But as someone who does like well-made genre films, like a lot of that sort of aloofness, just I find that unappealing.
I would think of. I mean, that makes me think of people talk about the Coen Brothers movies that way, sort of, in the sense that they say that, you know, a movie like Burn After Reading hates its characters, and I don't think the Coen Brothers have that. I don't think the Coen Brothers hate the characters in a movie like Burn After Reading. I think they're just exploring the characters absurdities. That doesn't mean they have contempt for it. So I would say that if you and I have a divergence of opinion on Seijun Suzuki, it's that if he is so antsy at being boxed in, that he makes a movie like Branded to Kill. For you, it seems like you think that is him saying, I'm above Branded to Kill. And I don't think that he thinks of it that way, that he's just doing the thing that makes him interested in Branded to Kill, which is not really a commentary on what Branded to Kill might have been, but it's just where he's at. So that's generally how I would view the increasing craziness of the Suzuki movies.
Yeah, for me, like, I can contrast Branded to Kill with something like Detective Bureau 2-3, and I can see that he is celebrating the absurdity and he thinks that that movie is silly, but at the same time he does the work he needs to in order for you to be invested in the characters and the story and scenes, like, to have proper amount of tension, and like that's just like a quote unquote, you know, my opinion or whatever, but like a properly made crime film, you know what I mean? Whereas like Branded to Kill, he does none of that work. He doesn't really seem to make the effort to me for you to know why you should care about him being the number 3 or anything like that. And like that to me is the difference between like someone who holds the form in contempt and someone who doesn't in one filmography. Whereas like the Coen brothers may or may not hate their characters. I don't know why the discussion about the Coen brothers to begin with is, do they hate their characters? Because their characters are fictional people they invented so they could tell a story. Like, I don't know why they would have that strong feelings about these people that they just invented for this one screenplay. Like, just because they write bad things happening to people doesn't mean they hate the characters. That just means that that's the kind of stories they want to tell, and that's what their worldview is. But like, it's clear, regardless of how they feel about their characters, the Coen brothers love their form. Like, they love the genres they play in. They love the films that came before them. They love the tropes, and they love finding new takes on those tropes. And that's like, to me, that is the huge difference between something like Burn After Reading and something like Branded to Kill.
I mean, I think when people would criticize a movie like Burn After Reading for hating its characters, I think it makes a lot of difference in terms of the tone, in terms of how you interpret the movie. Like, if the Coen brothers hate their characters and this movie is just like a sneer at dumb people, then that's mean-spirited, and you might find that to be more of a, I don't know, it's like I guess indulgent. It's not quite what I mean to say, but it's like a snipe. It's like it's not as fun if it's just a snipe. But I think the Coen brothers just find these characters amusing. I don't know that it enters their thought process whether or not they're laughing at them. But and so that would be the thing that I would apply to Suzuki. It's like, he may not be interested in this genre anymore, but I don't think he's laughing at it. But I do see what you mean in terms of, that you as a viewer may feel like, this isn't what I signed up for. This doesn't play by the rules to the point at which it stops being the thing that I hope that I would get out of it.
Right. And then also, like, if it was like a bad crime movie but a meaningful art film, like if I felt connected to the character's existential crisis in some way, like, that would also be completely cool for me. And there are plenty of movies that ostensibly are part of a genre, but they're not. Like, there are horror movies that aren't actually scary, but they express some other kind of anxiety. And I still like those and stuff like that. But like, for me, like, Branded to Kill isn't that either. And I do think it's not an inherent flaw of Branded to Kill. It is just a sensibility, and preference.
For the record, for me, what drives me through Branded to Kill, like, I don't have to care about the meaning of him being the number 3 hitman. I am driven along by the increasing desperation that out of the Joe Shishido performance, that he needs to know these answers, or that he's struggling to deal with the fact that the number one hitman has entered his apartment and is just toying with him like they're going to go get dinner together or something, because the number one hitman knows he could kill him at any time, and it's playing with his head in a way that I find funny. You know, it's the same thing with the rice thing. Like, I mean, I could come up with a way to fit that into the notion of it being about Suzuki's dissatisfaction with the movies that he's making, but I also just find it like his insistence on the rice thing came back again, like he's still doing it. Like that's the thing that, like, that's enough for me to find it amusing. Or the sort of, it feels a little bit similar to Detective Bureau 2-3 in the absurdity of his greatness as a killer. When they show him, there's a scene where he assassinates a person by the person is standing at a sink, and he just shoots a bullet up the sink pipe into the guy's face. That kind of stuff. That's the stuff that I find entertaining about Branded to Kill.
That's a good moment. There's no shortage of good moments in Branded to Kill, for sure. I don't think either of us saw any of his post Branded to Kill material.
Like you, I started watching Pistol Opera. I got distracted. I wasn't necessarily bored with it. I certainly would probably come to it with a lot more context now.
Yeah.
And I tried to, I went to the first of the Taisho trilogy, but I was just beat, and I passed out, because that movie has a very poetic sort of vibe, which, combines with the usual Suzuki looseness in terms of, telling a story in a way that is like perfect sleep recipe. I mean, I'm sure it's great, and I do want to see it at some point, but at the time, it was not something that I could get through.
So I guess that takes us to the end of our journey through Seijun Suzuki. Perhaps a part 2, or maybe just another Directors Club episode with the proper actual hosts. They could go through the career a little more thoroughly or whatever, but I do believe I have fulfilled my contractual obligation.
Sure.
which is ultimately isn't technically doing what you need to the most important kind of doing what you need to. Doing begrudgingly. No, I had a lot of fun doing this. Thank you, Tyler, for donating to the Most Likely Kickstarter.
This is a very long podcast already, but I did want to, I remembered on the old Directors Club we talked about other stuff that we had watched, and I did want to shout out, there's this movie that just went up last Friday on Netflix that is currently my number one movie of the year. It's this incredible documentary that I really love. It's called Shirkers. It's by this Singaporean director named Sandy Tan. In 1992, she and her friends went to a film class that they did over the summer, and she and these other two people, they sort of bonded there, and it was taught by this guy named George Cardona, and they made this plan that they were going to college, but they would come back on their college break, and they were going to shoot an independent feature film. So Sandy Tan wrote the script, and she ended up starring in the movie. One of her friends was the cinematographer, and the other one was going to edit the movie, and they sort of did all the other jobs on the movie. And so they spent a summer shooting this movie in 1992. It was like they got the whole movie in the can. George Cardona said, I'm going to go back to America and have the film developed, and then over winter break we can edit it. And he never came back. And so 25 years later, she made this movie that has the same title of the movie that she made, where she's sort of going through the history that she had with her friends, the experience of making the movie, and the experience of having it taken away from her. And I think it's just really, it's incredibly funny. It's really moving, and I think it's like, in terms of this ongoing current discussion about how, the abuses of male figures with power, how that impacts the art that the women that might have created great art, I think this is a really relevant piece of that discussion, because at the time the movie that they shot that movie, like Singapore had no independent film scene. And so if the movie had come out in 1992, even if it had been bad, it would be a part of history. So I think that movie's great. And then also, I was going to mention, because I know you also really loved it, is that next Tuesday, Blind Spotting will be available on digital, and it'll be on DVD and Blu-ray on the 20th.
I feel like a lot of people miss Blind Spotting. That's my number one film of the year.
I love Blind Spotting so much. I think as much as it sucks to compare them, and I don't really mean to compare them, I do feel like Sorry to Bother You sucked all the air out of that room, and I wish that they had both found their place.
I feel like, Blind Spotting came out in between Sorry to Bother You and Black Klansman, and I feel like those two movies took up way more of the discourse, where Blind Spotting is... there's a lot of really cool things about Blind Spotting. I would really like to rewatch it, so I'm excited for it to come out on DVD because I'm curious about what a second viewing will unfold, because there's a lot of choices that are very out there, and it takes risks in ways that I found very delightful the first time I saw it, and I wonder if they would feel the same the second time.
In keeping with the Suzuki's discussion, I mean, I think as I do appreciate the ambition of Sorry to Bother You. I think Sorry to Bother You is a very funny movie and a very smart movie, but I also feel like the movie is just a lot of ideas, and I think the advantage that Blind Spotting has over Sorry to Bother You is that Sorry to Bother You actually really cares about its characters, and I think those characters are the reason that I enjoy Blind Spotting so much. I mean, I think Blind Spotting is a great movie about, important cultural conversations, but I also think Blind Spotting is also just really funny and lively, and that's the stuff that I really like about it.
Yeah, I think Sorry to Bother You is just, it's sort of agitprop. It's just sort of, it exists to sort of introduce people to the importance of unions in a time when, collective bargaining is very weak, and, low-wage workers have never had less power or control over their destinies and everything. Like, Sorry to Bother You is just a comedy designed to, get that idea out there and energize people to go out and take action. And a lot of its failings come from the idea that it does that in lieu of being more complicated or more interesting or whatever else. Whereas Blind Spotting, I do think, is a little more thorny and challenging. And yeah, I really love Blind Spotting. I think Daveed Diggs is such an insane talent, and I don't know what other films he's been in, but as the lead of this film, I just adored him.
I'm really excited because they announced that him and Rafael Casal, who wrote this movie and starred it together, they're working on a new movie together. So that's exciting.
Cool. I do want to go back to Seijun Suzuki real quick. What are your top 3 Seijun Suzuki films?
Let's see. I think that I would probably say, I think Youth of the Beast I think I would probably have to go with Branded to Kill as number 1, and then I would put Youth of the Beast number 2, and I might put Gate of Flesh or Fighting Elegy at number 3. I think that, like I said in the rest of the podcast, Branded to Kill and Youth of the Beast, I feel like, are a great overview of everything that I like about Suzuki, and Branded to Kill is the expert version, and Youth of the Beast is sort of the beginner's version. And so those ones stand out to me. And then, I really liked both Fighting Elegy and Gate of Flesh. I guess I would probably give the edge to Fighting Elegy.
All right. My number 3 would probably be Detective Bureau 2-3. My number 2 would be Gate of Flesh, and my number 1 would be Fighting Elegy.
Mm-hmm. Hopefully, even though you struggle with Suzuki, I mean, you felt like this was a filmmaker that deserved to be seen, and even if you didn't get a lot out of him, it was still worth taking a look.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, this podcast was exhausting to do on a regular basis, and there's a lot of reasons why I don't do this podcast anymore. but it was almost always. I did not appear on the Michael Haneke episode because that was not at all a fulfilling experience for me. But that was a very frustrating moment where I was just like, no, I get nothing out of any of this, and I have nothing to say about the nothing I get out of it. I just got to call out on this one. But almost always, it's a rewarding experience and what you get out of it extends far beyond just my knowledge of any one director. So no, I had a great time doing this, and I'm going to have a great time selling back those box sets that don't have many movies I like. Thank you so much, Tyler, for coming on and for spending an hour with me trying to troubleshoot our connection so we could record this damn thing.
Yep. And thank you for doing it. Absolutely.
I don't have the whole spiel in front of me as far as this podcast goes, where you send emails or whatever. I don't even know what feed this is going to go on. This is going to go on the main Directors Club feed or what. But if you're listening to this, thank you so much for listening. Al and Brad will be back and, much more prepared and generally knowledgeable than I am with whatever their next episode may end up being.
I think we felt our way through as hit and miss as you might call Seijun Suzuki's filmmaking.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. We came out the other end with some opinions. And what else do you want from us? So until next time, you know what? Not until next time. There won't be a next time. I probably will never be on this podcast again. That's funny to think about. But at any rate, thanks for listening. Goodbye.
Bye.
All right, cool. Stop this, and hopefully this doesn't crash. Okay.
どこで生きても流れ物どうせさすらい一人身の明日はどこやら風に聞けかわいいあの子の胸に聞けあ東京流れ物流れ果てない旅に出ていつか忘れた東京の泣いてくれるな夜の雨男命は赤く散るあ東京流れ物